So I watched The Oath, all 10 episodes. The first season just came out, and I can't recommend it. Now, first thing I have to mention, because it's just the biggest thing I want to say, the visuals. It's one of the visually most unappealing shows that I've watched, and that's saying a lot because there's a lot of visually unappealing shows, but it's made even worse by the fact that it's a gangster show. So there's lots of cool visuals you can have of guns, of drugs, of bars, of prisons, of strip clubs, and they have it. They have all these sets, but the sets themselves are just so forgettable, so bland. I compare this to the Netflix Marvel shows even, which aren't these great shows as far as visuals go. Even Jessica Jones season 2 that just came out, the prison aesthetic that they had compared to here, just a world apart. So if Jessica Jones season 2 is getting a better prison aesthetic and is getting better visuals and better sets than your gangster show, something has gone horribly amiss. So the sets they use, the props, the guns we see, the background extras, they're supposed to be gang members. You never feel convinced that you're actually seeing a bar filled with gang members. It just looks very hokey. And then just the whole look, just this muted color palette, this cool look, which I guess it works on some shows. True Detective season 2, I guess it has a similar look and I really liked it, but here it just made everything look really cheap. It made the actors just look really bad. I've never seen these actors. Sean Bean's in this. He's never looked worse, less threatening, and part of that is just the look of the whole thing, so really disappointing. But I will say the actors, now I wasn't crazy about them initially, but they grew on me a lot, and they did some good characterization, some surprisingly good characterization, and episode 4 or 5, I was ready to give this show another chance and reevaluate my opinion, say, no, this is actually a pretty good show. It had a good pace. It was doing a good job of letting you binge it by having kind of cliffhangers in each episode. There was something major that happened, and it seemed to be building some momentum, getting some good characters that you cared about. You could tell them apart. You knew how they were different. Some good storylines, but then around episode 6, 7, they just doubled down on the most uninteresting storylines, and the show really fell apart to the point where I can't recommend it because I don't think it started strong. I think it's kind of a chore to get into. If you stick it out, I think you will like it more around episode 4 or 5 and have some good experience, but then the show falls apart, and by the end, you're going to be really wishing you got those hours of your life back. So the basic premise of cops being dirty and corrupt and very similar, and in this case synonymous with the gangs that are supposed to be policing, it's great. I mean, Training Day, The Shield, Den of Thieves that just came out, so it's a great premise, and the showrunner, actually, apparently he was in one of these gangs called the Reapers. In this case, they're the Ravens on the show. God, that some of the names are silly. So there's the Ravens, there's the Bezerkers, the racist gang, there's the Vipers, and then there's Neckbone. That's one of the big players here. And then the street drug, it's called WMD, like Weapons of Mass Destruction. So some very funny on-the-nose names. So the different characters, we have Steve. He's the leader, looks a little like Josh Duhamel. At first I thought, kind of pretty boy, couldn't really buy him as a gang member, but he did a great job. I gotta say, he had some moments where he had to really act tough and act like he was intimidating someone, and I thought he pulled it off great. So big surprise with him. We had Karen. Now she had a kind of interesting arc. So with her mom, she saw her mom constantly jumping from one guy to the other and kind of seeming weak and having to cling to guys. So she kind of went the opposite direction and tried to be independent, like she doesn't need anyone. So kind of an interesting arc with her. And then Pete, so his wife's father is actually kind of a bit of a gangster himself. So there's a great kind of father new husband rivalry going on there. Then Tom, Sean Bean, so he's in prison. He's the head of this gang, or used to be the head of this gang. He's in prison trying to get out. So there's a lot going on. And like I say, around episode 4 or 5, I felt that the show had a lot going for it. Now the violence, it was hit or miss. It was a mixed bag. There were some great gritty scenes of violence, but when they tried to do like a firefight, like a big action set piece, really disappointing. Now some highlights. There's a blowtorch scene. There's someone getting pushed into traffic. Someone gets their tattoo carved off their body. There's some great hostage torture interrogation scenes. So these kind of gangster moments. There's one time where you see a drug dealer get jumped by some fiends. Those were great. And again, it was there when it was at its best, but when they actually tried to pull out like the big action movie moments, I just don't think they were able to pull it off at all. But where I think it really started to fall apart, so I guess this will be mild spoilers for what happens towards the end of the season. So Sean Bean's character, he comes out of prison, and a lot of the rest of the story was him kind of taking his position back as the head of this gang and having this father-son rivalry with his son, who's now the head of the gang current. And I I feel like, the major problem with this was I never bought into the fact that this was an actual gang. It looked nothing like a gang. They didn't really act anything like a gang most of the time. It seemed like I could buy that they were 4 dirty cops and 4 friends that were doing bank robberies and other shady stuff together. I could buy that part of it. But when they really doubled down on this idea that, no, this is a gang and he's the head of all these gangs, I could buy him as the leader of this little foursome there. I could see him there as the head of an actual gang operating in the US. I couldn't really see it. So for me, the whole big rivalry and tussle over who's going to get to head up this gang, it just fell flat for me because I didn't buy that it was a gang, and I didn't buy the family dynamic as well. I thought it never seemed like a family for a variety of reasons, so the fact that they really just doubled down on the storyline, I think, was to its detriment. There were lots of other better, more interesting storylines that I wish we fleshed out more. One that I really liked, we see Karen, and I talked about her mom, and really a strained relationship with her mom, and we get this brutal moment, I'd say probably one of the best moments of the show, where her mom calls her and says, look, my boyfriend, he beat me up, he locked me out of the house, I don't know what to do, I'm scared. And we see Karen rush over, and she gets burned by her mom for the final time, and her mom really was just setting her up, and it was all a lie, and that was how Karen gets arrested. And it was just this horrible moment, and I thought it had great realism. At one point, Karen's working with a therapist, and the therapist trying to get her to confront her issues and have more healthy relationships with people, and the therapist's like, go to your mom and have this heart-to-heart and hash things out. And she just has this horrible interaction where her mom just doesn't even want her to be there, just tells her to leave, and it's just a brutal, realistic depiction of sometimes relationships, especially with people you love, or at least people who are family, are just so painful. And I thought it was just a great fitting end rather than them having some happily ever after moment. It's like, no, her mom was just horrible to her through the end and was the person that burned her. So that was a great twist, the mom turning her in. But the big twist that it ended with, where the big villain, she confesses everything, and turns out they had a tape recorder the whole time they were recording. For me, it's just, I wish we would just move away from this twist. I've seen it so many times, and I haven't even seen that many movies in general. I can't imagine someone who's a big movie buff and watched all these movies, how many times they've seen that cliche. So it just fell really flat for me. And the whole storyline, again, towards the end of the season, this whole thing with this corporation that was this pharmaceutical company and how they were manufacturing this drug, it just, for me, it wasn't interesting, and I don't know why they brought this up so late in the season. It was only around episode 4 or 5 we found out about this company and the guy who was running it, and then they just went all in, and this was just a huge part of the story, and I think it was just a mistake. And they don't even have the excuse with Sean Bean coming out of prison and this whole thing being a tussle for head of the gang. I think that they fell into the trap of, when you have a big name actor and you have this draw, feeling like you have to use him and base your whole story around him, rather than really looking at, well, which storylines are working, which storylines are going to be the best from a thematic standpoint or from a narrative standpoint, rather than look at, well, who's the biggest draw? Okay, let's base the whole story and what we're going to double down on all around him. So bottom line, I don't think this is a good show. I don't think I can recommend it. The one thing I will say for it, I don't think it's inherently doomed. I think there were some good elements, some good actors. I think some people might blame the actors. I don't think that's fair. I think the actors did a good job. There was some interesting storylines, some things they pulled off well, some memorable scenes, and had they focused more on the positive aspects and recognized what worked in the show, changed some other aspects, spent more money on set design, costume design, having just cooler images, like cooler images of guns, cooler images of drugs, just better visuals to look at, something that just wasn't so visually drab, would be the best way to put it. Just a very drab show to look at. This could have been good, but they didn't do those things, so it wasn't. And last thing I'll say, if you justify all the criticisms and say, well, look, they didn't want to glamorize it and they didn't want to make it look cool, that's why it looked so unpleasant and there weren't cool backdrops and sets and they didn't show cool images of all this typical gangster stuff like guns and strip clubs and drugs, that's a good excuse. I don't think that excuse applies in this case, because I think they did a lot to try to glamorize it and make it look cool. I don't think this was a cautionary tale to show the pitfalls of this life. I think it did try to make it look like it was cool. They didn't really zero in on how empty this lifestyle is and how much more fun in life there is in legal areas. So I think that excuse, that might work in some cases, but not in this particular TV show.